type of formula. You know, these cars were lightweight. One of these cars has holes drilled in the chassis just to be sure that it was lightweight for Formula One at the time. Extremely great engineering. That's one of the things that Bugattis were known for, and a lot of the things that we saw in racing cars more as they get towards the modern era started right here with the Ettore Bugatti and his great engineering.
Yeah, and there was one thing that he once described Bentleys, who were also big in the 30s, obviously, at places like Le Mans, built in Britain, and he described them as lorries on wheels. And so that was his take on how the British went about it. But like the Americans, the Bentleys were big, blustering animals, whereas these were far more stylish and elegant, and that was by purpose. But I want you to notice as we watch this, just some of the details about these cars and why they're so important to the history. You mentioned how we take so much from these cars that then are included in the next iteration, the next version of cars. I mean, I went up close look at some of the things. Notice the exhaust, for example, not underneath the car, but on the sides of the car. God knows how you get out without burning yourself. But another thing. You won't see it perhaps on these shots, but if you get up close to these cars, they use chain pulleys to use the brakes. Just a fascinating design.
Yeah, again, that was one of the things that, for all the engineering prowess that Bugattis have, one thing that he would not go with, and hydraulics were back in this particular time period, he did not like hydraulics, and that's why you have those pulleys that you pull on to stop this car. But you're absolutely right. You know, we talk about single overhead cam engines, double overhead cam engines. Well, this is why we have them. Bugatti came up with that through his engineering and had these on his cars exclusively.
Yes, and you mentioned effectively they started out as an aeroplane manufacturer, but they used that knowledge also, and that's another theme in motor racing. Throughout the early years of motor racing, both in World War I and World War II, which were terrible things, but they actually helped the racing industry because a lot of the technology that was used in the aeroplanes, everybody was looking to go lighter and lighter and lighter, and I think of the Spitfire or the Hurricane as being, the ultimate World War II aeroplane. But that is from years and years of developing where the Red Baron began back in World War I. But both of them were trying to achieve the same thing, which was to go lighter but faster.
And look at this race we have, nose to tail going through the turns there.
Wonderful.
Again, these may be priceless cars, irreplaceable, but they were actually racing yesterday, and here they are out in the rain racing today. You're watching history in motion, folks.
And like I said, those brakes are on pulleys, guys. So imagine the conditions. You can see the sitting water. We were watching it in the Trans Am race.
Another engineering feat that the Bugattis have, we talk about synchromesh gearboxes, talk about paddle shifters, what have you. Well, they started with the Bugattis. They had what was called mesh gearboxes. Not synchromesh, but mesh. But for the time, that was extremely advanced. These engines that are in these cars, depending on the year, go from the 3.3 liter, which was used for the Grand Prix in the early days. They won the Targa Florio 5 years in a row with that engine. The 2.3 liter and the 1.4 liter, and that 1.4 liter was later on as the Formula One regulations, because Bugatti was dominating in Formula One at the time. They tried to regulate them weight-wise. Well, Bugatti figured out that if we put the engine a little bit lower down into the car, that would get better center of gravity. What a great concept in these early days of racing. And we drill holes in the chassis, that will make that car lighter too, and we'll get it through weight. Sounds like something NASCAR would do, doesn't it, John?
It does. You see them leaning out of the cars, and by the way, it's not for effect, mind you. You are literally balancing the cars. Back in the day, they do have mirrors, but they probably back in the day would possibly have a passenger for two reasons. One, breakdowns, and two, spotting.
And these Bugattis are something to see. Again, we have I think the oldest one out there on track is a 1913 Type 22, and I believe that is the one that has Bugatti's signature on the engine. The lady from the American Bugatti Club was nice enough to come up and correct me. I thought it was a 1922 just from the type number, but it's actually a 1913. But most of these cars are from the 1930s, mid-30s, 35C. I think we have several 51s, a couple of Type 57s, all of those with great Grand Prix heritage. Again, they won, and I'm going to let you pronounce these names for me, the French Grand Prix twice,
A Poe.
A Poe, and I think the other one was at Gertrude. Did I say that right?
I think so.
Okay.
I'm no expert.
And they use these engines development-wise for the road-going cars. The road-going cars were known to be very luxurious. If you go to their website and look at their lineage of road-going cars, you'll see the Royal RP41, and that is not a race car. That is a road-going car, and it looks as luxurious and as long as some of the stretch limos that you'll see here in New York at the airports. And it was luxurious inside. They wanted it to be, don't drive to someplace, have an experience to arrive in style. That was kind of what they were going for.
And if you want to know some of the names, you mentioned the Veyron, which is still around. That was after one of the gentlemen that won the 24 Hours of Le Mans back in the day. And also Louis Chiron. Louis Chiron was well known around the streets of Monaco, just like Charles Leclerc.
Right.
He is a Monegasque, or was a Monegasque, and so therefore there is a Bugatti Chiron as well. And these are the names of some of the greats that raced these wonderful names. And the Monegasque racing driver Louis Chiron, therefore, has a Bugatti named after him. And a current 2015, they launched another Bugatti Chiron as well. And they've even got a Chiron hypercar launched in 2016 at the Geneva Motor Show. So the history is very impressive and continues today.
Yeah, it was Chiron that was on the podium more times during his Bugatti racing career, and was the driver that had the most podiums through the length of the Bugatti racing era. We have one of the cars out there that was the last production race car. And again, you'll notice some of these cars will say produced. That was because they became more popular and they were actually produced as opposed to the earlier ones that were actually hand-built. And again, having a hand-built Bugatti out here on a wet track on Watkins Glen International, I just can't tell you how much respect I have for these drivers. And I know you come from Britain, where the Isle of Man TT is very, very popular, and it looks like a sidecar driver, you know, as they lean out and try to get some gravity or some momentum going towards the turn.
Yep, absolutely. No question about it. The leaning is not for effect, I assure you. It literally is to try to balance as much as you can the weight of the car as you fly into some of these corners. We're about to go in the Mission Foods turn 1, and here you go. Don't touch that white line, careful. I'm frightened for these guys. That's the number 14 car, Charles McCabe at the wheel of that Bugatti T59. And it is the number 32 of Brad Baker in his Type 51, leading the way at the moment. And Travis in the 13 has just taken the lead. Just changed there quickly. And that's Alan Travis in the T22 Bugatti, that dark blue one, leading the way.
Yeah, McCabe is in that car that we were referring to, the 1933 Type 59. That was the last production race car from Bugatti. They did have a couple of specially built Formula One cars, but this was the last production race car that Bugatti had before they went into such financial trouble that they had to be purchased. And the gentleman that purchased them not for their automobile manufacturing, but for their airplane parts. He wanted to do that, and then of course they were later purchased by Volkswagen.
The car you're looking at now, the number 4 of Alan Rosenblum at the wheel. This is a Type 37A Bugatti, built in 1927, and somewhat appropriate that we are celebrating the great long life of Elizabeth the Great, as she's now being known. Elizabeth II passing away on Thursday, and she was born in 1926, so period cars for a special weekend. And while we're on that moment of remembrance, let's of course remember it is September 11th, and we do want to make sure that while we are enjoying this weekend, we're not forgetting the momentous occasion some 21 years ago.
And the sacrifices that were made during that day to rescue as many people as possible, and to go through, and as more people were running out of the building, there's first responders were running into the building. So we have utmost respect, and we'd like to pay our tributes to everyone there.
Here, here. Charles Chalvoy in the 139. Let's go through your shot there.
I'd like to go back to that Bugatti Type 37A. Now I want you to remember, this is a 1928 Type 37A. 122 miles per hour was the top speed, and it came from a root supercharger. Now, where have we heard a root supercharger before there, Jonathan?
Good point.
Yeah, and this was, again, this is what is just so magnificent about these cars being out there. There are such engineering feats that were done with these cars, and they don't look aerodynamic. I can understand people looking at these and saying, well, they look kind of like a square for racing, but for their time, they were the most aerodynamic cars out there. That was part of where the speed came from. Yes, the lightweight chassis, yes, the power of the engine, but it was the aerodynamics too that were all in play.
Yeah, notice that last corporate car we saw the exhaust underneath. One of the first cars probably to do that when we see some of the earlier iterations with the exhaust on the side.
Now, the Type 37A, that is the supercharged version. I believe that the other 37 is out there, and that was just the normal engine version. That had a 1.5 liter engine in it. But again, the engineering, getting about a 90 to 100 mile per hour top speed out of a 1.4 or 1.5 liter engine in the late 20s or early to mid 30s, that's stunning to me.
Look at those headlights.
Yeah, that's cool. I just saw that.
That's wonderful.
And what does that look like? I would say the Austin Hilly Bug-Eye Sprite. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. It's probably where he got the idea. This Alan Travis in that 1913. You can see it on the plate there on the front. 1913, folks. Think about it. That's almost, well, it is 100 years ago. Unbelievable.
And that is the 1913 Type 22. That is the one that, it used to be that people took a lot of pride in what they built, and this was one of the cars that was built as opposed to produced. And Ettore Bugatti actually signed the engine on that car, and signed every engine that went into the Type 22s.
Likewise, the gearbox on the outside, again, something that you may not have thought of, but they hadn't had the room at this point to put the gearbox in the middle or inside the cockpit. So the handbrake, and there you see on the outside the gear lever. And my mate Lake doing a hell of a job of giving us a really nice close look at these wonderful cars. And it's appropriate that Lake's down there because there's a veritable lake right in front of him at the bottom of turn 9. Poor guys out there. But this is truly quite amazing that they're even out there.
And Ettore Bugatti, as we talked yesterday during the Bugatti feature race, this being the Governor's Cup race, Bugatti was one of those designers that was all hands-on. He actually helped in the design of the car. He was sure that they were well represented in racing, and that when they went to racing, he wasn't there to finish second. He was there to finish first, much like Roger Penske or Chip Ganassi of modern-day racing. Second place to him was losing.
Yes, just as Red Bull and Penske dominate, if you will, in Indy and Formula One respectively, the Bugattis of the day were the cars to beat.
And of course, we're watching the Formula One race a little bit on your tablet there, Jonathan. And these are the cars that the modern-day Formula One cars came from. Again, these were the Formula One cars that were the cars to beat as they went to Monaco, as they went to Pau, as they went to the Grand Prix. And Bugatti was very proud of them winning the World Championship in Formula One.
Yeah, and the Germans in the form of Volkswagen Group, which of course owns Porsche, and that's what Bugatti now is sort of effectively under the auspices of. Still maintaining the name and maintaining the modern day cars, as you say, they're quite different than these, but it's great that the Volkswagen Group felt it important enough to keep the name going. And while they don't produce a great deal of Bugattis, it really is something that if I had a chance to buy any car, I think it might well be a modern-day Bugatti just because of this.
And I have to tell you that they're doing an excellent job. This is not an easy track to drive in the dry.
Look at him take this first corner.
In a modern car. But look at that. He's right at the apex. Great job.
And look at that. Little bit of touch of oversteer. Grabs it quickly.
And now going up the elevation change up to the S's and going down that front straightaway where I'm not sure what year that is, but they had anywhere from a top speed of about 90 up to about 130 was, I believe, the highest speed that the Bugattis, at least the Grand Prix Bugattis had. And then he'll go into the Big Machine Vodka Spike Coolers bus stop. and they're doing a much better job than some of our Trans Am drivers.
Yeah, you said it. And you may also notice the cambering of the wheels.
Yes.
It's an interesting factor. You see how the wheels sort of point outward? I mean, that still happens today in modern day racing.
I say that's part of racing, yes.
Yeah, as the power gets faster, you mentioned that they can do over 120 miles an hour. Well, those wheels tend to straighten up as the power is pushed down to the ground. And so that is why at these slower speeds here in the wet, they look as though they're out of shape, but they certainly aren't.
And again, we're talking about cars that date back 1909 was when the company was founded, but 1913, 1920, 1930s, and here you are, the man at the head of the company, thinking about aerodynamics. He's thinking about weight, thinking about camber in the wheels. I mean, how advanced was he? That's part of it. And then these, again, like today, our modern day racing is a great test bed for production cars. You know, you can stress parts. The parts may fail that you didn't think of because of racing. Well, here the same thing was used. Bugatti using the racing as a way to develop quicker his Bugattis, and he was very much ahead of the curve to any of the other manufacturers.
Can you imagine in the early days of the car? I mean, I'm talking another 20 years back, maybe 30 years back, when Mercedes first started developing the car. The horse was the mode of transport, and while it sounds funny to say it, but it's true. Horsepower is how we measure the power of our cars. When you say 400 horsepower, it means the power of 400 horses. Developed, of course, from the fact that before the car was only horses.
And as we talked yesterday, Jonathan, you know, we had done a race earlier with the Ragtime group that had Model Ts in it. And the Model Ts were basically a box put on a chassis because they were basically the first production car. And one of the things that was not good about them was the suspension. Well, Bugatti actually has coil and leaf suspension. Again, this to me fascinates me, the extent of engineering and the extent of thought that Bugatti had, Ettore Bugatti, to develop and design these cars with that type of knowledge and that type of innovation.
Yeah, and those who don't know, we often think, I think a lot of Americans would kind of presume that Henry Ford invented the car, because he certainly invented the mass production of cars with that Model T Ford. Do you know what he gleaned from the earlier iterations from Europe, from Mercedes, from Bugatti, from Bentley, that would go in his cars, or he could maybe, I mean, it's all about, you know, imitation was flattery, of course.
I mean, in Henry Ford's cars?
Yeah. Or American, the emergence of American cars.
Basically, Henry Ford, number one, saw how Europe was going with their racing and knew that the car was the wave of the future. In fact, it was supposed to be a steam-powered or electric car that Henry Ford was going to build. And the reason that he went to a gasoline-powered engine was because of racing. And when we were talking racing in the early days, it wasn't in the United States. It was all over in Europe, as you well know, Jonathan, coming from England. It was, you know, what are they doing in Europe? What are they doing correct? What do I need? More importantly, what do I need to not be doing? What mistakes do I need not to be doing? And a lot of the parts for his cars came from Europe. And Henry Ford had this down so much that he had special crates that the parts were shipped to him in. He actually took apart those crates, and he used part of those crates into the chassis of the car. And then what was left over, and you may recognize his name, was made into Kingsford charcoal. So where Kingsford charcoal came from was from Henry Ford and those crates. But every bit of what came and what went into that car was as reusable, which, you know, we were hearing more and more these days. But everything was reusable. Most of it was just basically, what do I not need to do, and what are they doing in racing? But it was basically just the box on the chassis and get them mass produced as quickly as possible.
You know, as I mentioned before, Indianapolis was one of the first ever race tracks, along with Brooklyn's a similar oval, smaller obviously than Indianapolis. And Indianapolis, of course, the yard of bricks as it now is known, it was completely bricks at the time. God knows how you would drive across bricks all the way around Indianapolis.
I don't know how you have any teeth left.
Exactly. You'd have to wear a gum shield, I think.
I'll say the reason that Jonathan was a little bit nervous there was going into Mission Foods Turn 1 on a dry line, you usually carry a lot of speed into there, and you go over the rumble strips and out onto that. Yeah. And that Bugatti almost did that. And folks, this is not a dry track, as you can well see if you're watching this.
Flabbergasted that they're pushing these cars through their paces.
And you could have seen his hands. They were extremely quick, and he caught that car and motored on like nothing happened. Now, he may not be that calm inside, but he was, from the outward picture, he was very calm and collected that car and went on.
I tell you what, I challenge Colton Herter to try to do this on a day like this at Watkins Glen. I don't think he would have the same success as these men. Certainly Brad Baker in that number 32 Type 51, absolutely hooning round this Watkins Glen circuit, and it's a joy to see.
I always learn new words when I work with Jonathan. Hooning around.
Hoon. That's a south. It's an Australian and New Zealand
It
word.
may be south.
They like to hoon.
It may be south, but I come from Georgia. We don't use that word in the south.
Well, you hoon around. You're a hooner.
Okay.
You like to go fast.
Okay. See, I learned so much when I work with Jonathan.
There you go. Oh, we've got language down, that's for sure. We're not much good at much things, but language we love.
Just looking at my notes here, the Type 51, that was a 1931 Type 51. The Grand Prix Racing Type 51 introduced, and it had a twin overhead cam engine. Now, again, I just find this fascinating. Nowadays, that is nothing here. Oh, Mustang has a twin overhead cam engine, or Ferrari has, V12. This is the beginnings of modern Grand Prix racing, the beginnings of modern racing. And here, Bugatti has a twin overhead cam engine, 2.3 liters, Roots supercharged, 160 horsepower, with only 40 of these, and this is one of the cars that was hand built. But I mean, just reading this, you would think that I was describing a modern race car.
Yeah. Well, we're looking at the leader, the number 32, Brad Baker, and he really is hooning, as I described, around the circuit. He's lapping people at the moment. He's some 5 seconds up the road quicker than most of them, but you can see how he's working it and how fast he is through our bus stop, the wonderful side of the big machine.
Yep.
Vodka Spike Coolers bus stop. Wonderful stuff, and he is absolutely flying through here.
And I'm a little surprised that it is this particular car that is out front, because the Type 57 was basically the car that was the most successful for Bugatti in Grand Prix racing, and also the Mille Miglia and the Targa Florio. But this is, as we just said, a Type 51, which is a little bit earlier than that, and he's doing a wonderful job out there, Jonathan.
Yeah, no question. And for those of you who don't know, motor racing wasn't always around circuits. They didn't have them. And as I just mentioned, some of the early iterations were ovals. So it was kind of point to point. London to Brighton, the first ever motor race, they believe, was Paris to Rouen back in 1890.
And you were telling me yesterday, how long was the Targa Florio?
Oh, these cars would have raced the Targa Florio, and it's over 1,000 miles. I mean, how the heck do you race one of those?
And they won 5 consecutive years from 1925 to 1929. And again, using racing.
And that's on roads.
Yes, it's on regular street roads, like you would be going out of here, to the hotel. That was the roads they were racing on, but they were not paved roads, folks. They were not as good as we have today. And again, the prowess of using racing as a development for his road-going cars, which had an exceptional reputation, both for the engineering and for the styling of the cars.
Yeah, I can't overemphasize just what a wonderful opportunity this is for both SVRA and for Watkins Glen to have these wonderful cars all together on one track and racing in these conditions, I may add. But there's no other sport in the world that is able to do this. We jokingly say that some people put their art on walls, we race it. And it's true. It's absolutely true. It's not funny. It is absolutely true. And a long way to continue. And I mean, the younger generations now will get into electric cars, and the combustion engine may well be long gone. But I think racing will continue. We still race horses, so I don't see any reason why we wouldn't still race the combustion engine.
And a lot of these cars, not only have they put a lot of miles around Watkins Glen, but a majority of these drivers came from the West Coast or very close to it. We have several drivers that came from California, Santa Clara, and Van Nuys come to mind right away, but we had several cars that were coming from Scottsdale and Phoenix, Arizona. Yep. So a cross-country trip. Again, very glad to have these drivers, glad to have these cars and this piece of history right before your very eyes, hopefully watching on the live stream and listening to us either in the United States or around the world. But again, a history that you just cannot put a price on.
No, you're right. They are absolutely priceless, which is why it is even more spectacular to see them out in the wet like this. Just truly, truly incredible. Out of turn 8 then and down to turn 9. And Laps ticking down as Baker McCabe. He's got a 20-second lead now, Brad, at the moment. As we take a look at the number 11, currently in third place, Mr. Green. Good name. Spelled it wrong, never mind. But it's Nathaniel Green.
Now, here we are talking about the Governor's Cup, Jonathan, and we'll go back to Trans Am. The very first race that was ever run in Trans Am was called the Governor's Cup.
There you go. And I'm right in saying that back in the day, they only went to a few tracks. I think Sebring, Watkins, Glen, and
Mid-Ohio, I believe, was the other one.
That's right, yeah. So it just shows you, I was looking at the 23 calendar for Trans Am and for SVRA. It's kind of expanded.
Yeah, the 10-year anniversary, September 8th, was actually the day that Tony Perella took over the SVRA, and wow, what a fantastic job he has done, not only with SVRA but with Trans Am, formerly Regional Americas, and of course the F4US, International GT being a part of our family. It's just been a wonderful association, and every time that you ask Tony, well, what do you see? He says, well, we're just getting started.
Yeah. Well, and the beauty of what Tony, and I don't want to, overdo it, but the truth is, Tony, came to this particular track when he was a 10-year-old and watched Trans Am like in 1969, and that passion mixed with his business acumen makes what the success he's had so important. And why? Because the combination of passion and business head is what makes this such a special series, and why so many people want to be part of it. Over 400 cars here this weekend.
And now this is a featured mark of the weekend, Bugatti. We have another featured mark that is Ford, and the reason I bring that up is Ford Mustang. The introduction of the Ford Mustang to the public was right here at Watkins Glen International. Dan Gurney driving that car around. First laps that a Ford Mustang racing car ever turned was supposedly right here at Watkins Glen International, and it was named, we were talking about planes before, supposedly it was named for the P-51 Mustang that was in World War II.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, people forget that, don't they?
Yeah.
You always think about the Mustang as the Ford Mustang, but yep.
And a lot of the things that Ford Mustang has on it, again, we keep going back to this, were originated right here with the Ettore Bugatti. Sadly, his son passed away before the father Ettore did. That was Jean Bugatti, and he actually passed away in a Le Mans testing accident. The type, I believe it was 51, and I'm not positive, so don't quote me, but I think it was a Type 51. They had what was called a tank car, not like a tank, but it was just supposedly built as strong as, because it was a 24-hour race, and he was unfortunately passed away in a testing accident.
So the final lap, as the rain continues to fall, we can't do much about the weather, but that's the way it goes. We had a glorious day yesterday. If you want to see these guys in the dry and how fast they really can go, check out yesterday's coverage on speedtour.tv, on YouTube, Facebook, wherever you want to choose. But yeah, you'll be able to see these guys in the dry as well. But this has been, I actually quite like them a little slowed down, because you can really start to see the intricacies. For example, that's where the lever you see on the left-hand side there, that's where you put the spare wheel.
But look at this, in the rain, racing, passing, going through on the outside. I know that's the rain line, but still, in a priceless Bugatti. Spectacular.
Absolutely superb. So Baker McCabe and Green are your top three in this feature race. On the final lap now. A wonderful, wonderful sight.
Look at that grill. Just
look at the crank as well. That's how you start them.
Yep.
If you didn't know.
A lot of people early in the days had broken arms from trying to start those.
No kidding.
Because it would kick back on them, and not be ready for that was not good.
That's what the passenger was for, wasn't it?
Yes,
you jump in, one does the throttle, one does the crank, and away you go.
Right. And we're looking at this on our screens here, Jonathan. We can kind of barely see them, and you have to imagine what type of view the drivers have. And again, if you look back in the day, they didn't have racing helmets; they had racing goggles.
That's right. Yeah.
If they did have a helmet, it was leather. It certainly wasn't one of the manufacturers that we have available now.
Well, and also think about this: one of the problems that they had in those days was the reliability of oil sort of seeping out of the block and of the engine, and so those goggles would easily get fogged up, if you like, with oil. And you often saw at the end of a 500 or any of these races, they would take their goggles off, or they'd be literally having to clean them on the fly because the oil from the cars, which over a time period would start to throw itself up into the driver's face. And so, yeah, just another hazard.
And these cars are not the easiest, the racing cars are not the easiest to get in and out of either.
Nope. There's the checkered flag then on our Governor's Cup feature race. Well done to Brad Baker. And McCabe taking second place, and Nathaniel Green in the T35 taking third.
Fabulous racing. Thank you, everybody that brought these cars out across country, or they had several drivers here from New York. But thank you, everybody, for bringing these cars out and showing us this piece of history, this era of history, if you will.
Wonderful celebration of Bugatti here through the ages. Cars from 1913 all the way up to 1932 in the form of Charles McCabe's second place car. And there it is, Nathaniel Green. And that tape over the lights to make sure they don't smash the headlights. That's probably the only modern part beside the helmet and the race suit.
This is pretty much just the start of our afternoon slate of activities, Jonathan.
Yes, absolutely. We've got lots to come, including Group 6, Group 12, Group 9. And as we wrap up our coverage of the Bugattis, my thanks once again to Scott Conway. We'll take a short break here from the Glen. Join us after this.